address anybody for permission or to state that you are going to video or auditorily record?
I'm sorry.
Did you ask or did you let anybody know that you were going to record? I just want everybody to know that it's being recorded other than what we're doing. Okay? So you're doing
I
both?
record meetings pretty regularly.
Okay,
Public
and you just,
meeting.
sure, it's fine. So I saw you had your phone up here and then you're videotaping it as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just.
Okay. Perfect.
Videos are on our website, just so if you wouldn't mind pointing out to everybody too. The
What's that?
videos are on the township website too, so.
Yeah.
If you can let everybody know where to go get them. That
Yeah.
was people, if
Yeah,
people,
it's a little different quality, a little different. Yeah. Sorry about that.
so
A little different view.
I understand, I was just
But
letting you
absolutely, I
know
they're on there.
that it's
It's a
not,
good idea.
if we're trying to word out, it's,
That's not a problem. That's one thing.
Kristen, do you want to start us off? How are we recording? Oh, sorry. I know. We've done it. Right, so it's just this. It's all for the work week, right? We don't have a work session. I'm willing to be able to do all that. Okay, yeah. We can just say we are. Let's do.
Holidays. Well,
How are you? How are you?
No, you did not. I came to my office today and I about to shell down and started, so I don't think you can.
Is that me?
No. I legit fell down.
trying to get started.
Yeah. Right now. But I got the.
Yeah, I was gonna see if we could go around there. Kind of realize who's on the commission, who's on the ETA, for and any residents that are here. Are there any else here?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
sure.
Everybody else can volunteer?
What's the matter?
Who was the number then? I
I'm
don't
gonna
know.
read it to you.
Recording in progress.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, hey.
It's needed a minute.
Yeah.
Hi. Wow. Welcome everyone to our Tate Township Joint Board Meeting. This is the second one. This one is not formal, so it'll look a little different. It is just a working group meeting. So our purpose tonight is to engage the boards, the public, to participate probably towards the end unless something comes up in the middle here, because we're going to sort of lay a lot out and then we want to hear more. But this is a working group meeting. So what we're going to be looking at tonight is the first sort of section of our zoning code update. So as most of you might recall, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but somebody might be watching that is not aware. At the end of last year, the Board of Trustees decided to engage in land use planning and a zoning code update for two reasons. Number one, we had some grant funds available that we had received during COVID, and they needed to be allocated by the end of last year. These funds had been previously also used for the fire department, putting in some fire hydrants, They had been used to pave some roads, and so what was remaining, we decided to sort of pivot towards zoning. The reason that we had done that is there had been a lot of discussion about upcoming development, potential development that may be coming our way, based on developments happening in neighboring communities. And identification that our zoning resolution is, hadn't been substantively updated in 20-some years, I think, right? So it's been a while, and things have changed, right? The way people live, the way people work, all of those things have changed. And we were coming to realize that it was getting very difficult to apply fairly and for folks to understand kind of how it all worked together. So those things are not inexpensive to do. And so since we had some grant funding available, we decided to apply it for that purpose. So we've sort of been working in 2 steps. The first one is coming up with creating, based on community feedback, a comprehensive land use plan. So what that really means is we want to know what the community wants the township to look like. Where does it want to go? Does it want, a lot of residential development? Does it want residential development? Does it want, what does that development, if any, look like? And question for commercial, there have been questions about uses, all of that good stuff. So what we're really trying to do is hear from the community and make decisions about how to potentially evaluate any requests for zone changes or development that may come our way, right? We can't do that unless we know what the community wants. So that's sort of, we've been spending some time doing that. And then part 2, that informs how we should update our zoning resolution. What should it say? What should some allowable uses be, and what should the districts look like, and where should they be, and all of that good stuff. We are not changing zoning. We are not looking to increase regulation or do any of those things. We're just trying to take a fresh look at where our zoning code was, bring it up to date to the extent necessary, and then talk about as a community what those regulation changes should look like, if any, and sort of go from there. So big picture, that's kind of, I don't think I did anything. Okay, so that's sort of where we are. And the purpose of this meeting is not to make decisions, right? This is the first time we're sitting down. What we're looking at is a document that was developed by our planning consultant. That's Brydale Clarion, Andy and Max over here, who have been working hard with us, and we really appreciate their efforts. So they've sort of put together a draft based on their experiences of how some other communities have done it, and we're going to be evaluating it and deciding, hey, does this look okay for Tate, or does it need to look different? So I just want to preface that, because it's not as though any of these boards have been working on this behind the scenes, and this isn't a reflection of necessarily what Tate should look like. This is a place to start. We're going to get feedback, and then if it's good to go, then great. But I suspect, as with all things, that's the point, right? We're going to discuss it at a high level and make changes to reflect the way we want our community to look. So, without further ado, I think, Andy, you mentioned you would sort of wanted to start with introductions, right?
Yeah, that'd be great. Just so, I guess I'll start. Andy England with the Clarion, consultant hired by Tate Township to take a look at comprehensive plan and obviously the zoning resolution update. We kind of get into some of the specifics on that, but it's good to see you all and meet those that I haven't met yet. So,
I'm Max Barrett. I'm also with Brydale Clarion. Same thing. Looking forward to working with you guys.
Oh, hi. I'm Jim Albrecht, and I'm a zoning committee on.
You love Board of Zoning Appeals.
Michael Tolan, zoning board of appeals.
Kristen Steinley, Board of Trustees.
Tom Wilson, Board of Trustees. Rusty Gerby, for Trustees.
Dave Kelsey, Zoning Board.
There's the non zoning.
Betty Armacost, zoning commission. Tiffany Riddle, zoning commission. Happy to know that you're
For all of them.
Shelby Bear, zoning inspector.
Anybody in any public participation? Would anybody like to identify themselves? Okay, that's fine. You don't have to.
I like the idea of something that like Kristen was hitting up on here. Obviously, it's our zoning change and our land use plan for the next 30 years. And we all realize that it is very extremely important to the community. One, we have to stay, like Kristen said, we have to stay up to date with this. But the other thing is here is I like to make it clear that we made a decision from the very beginning that it had all three boards sees different outlooks and different types of meetings and stuff and different things that keep occurring, different problems, different. That's the whole purpose for all three boards coming together is because we all see three different outlooks on it. And that way we can bring them all together to make sure we don't miss anything. And that's why this is so important.
Thank you guys for being present tonight. I was actually, for everybody's sort of stuff. Thanks for being here.
No, I appreciate it. And thank you all for being here as well. I've got to say, with a lot of the different committees that we work with, whether it's a working group or an advisory committee for these things, I like this format a lot to hear the different input of the people that actually work with the code, work with the zoning resolution, and review and are the ones that are kind of charged with maintaining the comprehensive plan and the zoning resolution. So we want to make sure that it's stated that while we kind of organize the information, you all are the experts, the public, boards, you all are the ones that live and breathe the township, so we kind of look to your guidance for what the township is looking for, and we can take a look at some of the best practices that we have seen in other similar municipalities. So I kind of want to preface this whole meeting by saying that because I think they're, in the reviewing documents, and again, nothing is final, this is all very preliminary, draft form. There might be some things that, if you are reviewing it, you disagree with, we need to hear that. We want to make sure that we are showing you what different options are out there so that you can understand and kind of see what possibilities are there. But if it's not appropriate for Tate Township, it does not hurt our feelings. It's your code, it's your comprehensive plan. So we want to make sure that we understand what the township is really looking to see out of this process. So what we've got, there's a couple of different attachments that I think were emailed out to everybody in advance. I know it was a lot of reading. So what we'll do today is to kind of go over all of the, just the high level, what each thing is, take you back to when we started, what we've heard so far with the different engagement meetings that we've held so far, kind of the direction that the comprehensive plan is moving, what we've heard so far, what the deliverables are that we have at this point for your review and input. And then kind of move into the zoning resolution updates. I will say many times zoning resolution updates because we are updating the zoning resolution, but we have updates to inform you on. So if I do that, you can either laugh or just keep a tab and you can drink after the meeting. So this process in itself is pretty unique because we're doing both the comprehensive plan and the land use update, or not the land use update, I'm sorry, the zoning resolution update in tandem. Typically, it's done where there's the comprehensive plan is done on one step, and then that informs the way that the zoning resolution is written. This is a little unique in that we're looking to get this done in a 12-month period, which is nice because we're able to really stay focused, make sure that the input that we're hearing from the comprehensive plan is just immediately joined with any proposed updates to the zoning resolution. So with that, like I said, kind of two phases of tonight's agenda, and again, as Kristen mentioned, pretty informal, so if there are things that we go over, feel free to interrupt us. We will have time at the end of each section to kind of go over any questions, comments that people have. I think primarily the focus for tonight is to really provide an update for where we are with the comprehensive plan. We've held a couple engagement meetings, most recently at the Empowered Youth Picnic at Burke Park. So we've taken all of the feedback that we've received from that and condensed it down into something that we can kind of present to you all, identifying planning theme areas, some goals, and then what the next steps might be. And then going into the zoning code, that should say zoning resolution, going over kind of an overview of what the purpose is behind that, why we're looking to update it, kind of talk about proposed restructuring of it. So taking what the existing code looks like and restructuring it into a format that not only staff and the boards and trustees can review it easily, but we want to make sure that the residents and business owners that are looking to do improvements on their property can take a look at it, see what applies to them, what doesn't, and make sure that it's an easy to use document. So we'll kind of go through that. I know that the information in front of you is pretty heavy in content, but I think the purpose of tonight, which is really good, is to kind of inform how to review that information. And then again, we'll kind of go over some discussion on that. There's some key topics that I think will come up. But with that, I can hand it over to Max if you'd like to go on with the comprehensive plan updates.
So, kind of looking back at what we've done so far this year, starting at the end of 2024 and the beginning of this year, there was preliminary conversations between Tate Township and McBride Clarion as far as what their needs were. And then we really jumped into the process starting in February with the first zoning commission meeting. At the end of February, there was the joint board meeting, the first one. And then from there, we've had 2 public surveys open, along with one public meeting, and then the Empower Youth Picnic event at Burke Park. And then just into July, and that's where we are today. So as of today, we have over 250 participants total in the process. There's 167 total survey responses as of today. We had approximately 10 people come to the first public meeting, and then at the Empower Youth event, that's where we heard from a lot more people, 75 or more people at that event. So we've had broad participation so far in this process.
You can go back for a second.
Yeah.
So the public meeting number 1, a couple things to point out on that. I know that it was pretty low attendance. We turned out that we were competing against the fish fry. So a public engagement meeting was not as enticing as a fish fry. So that kind of talks a little bit about the low turnout, but we want to make sure that it's known that all of the input activities that were at that meeting were posted as an online survey. So we wanted to make sure that those that weren't able to attend were able to do so in that format. So that 250 participants does include, or that 167 does include people that submitted information or feedback along the lines of what we had at that first public meeting.
And then, based on the engagement that we've had so far, we've been working behind the scenes on an engagement report. And so that's basically a summary document of everything that we asked the community and how they responded. And so, here is kind of preliminary findings of that report about some of the key topics that have come up. And so I have a little note there at the bottom that this is just how we've interpreted the public feedback so far, and that more details will be available in that full report, including an itemized number of responses that are organized by what came up throughout so far. So here's kind of the first 4 findings, topic areas. One being preservation of rural and natural character, maintaining rural, small town atmosphere, preserving farmland and green spaces, natural resources, and preventing overdevelopment from those resources in the township. Thoughtful, controlled growth and land use is also what's desired, and that's supporting small, balanced growth and opposing high density and sprawling development. That has been very consistent throughout the survey so far in the public feedback. We also have enhanced community amenities and recreation. This is another topic that's come up. The public is telling us that they'd like to see more parks and recreation facilities and improving and maintaining public spaces. And then the last one there is strengthening the local economy and small businesses, focusing efforts on supporting local small businesses versus large chains and industrial growth is primarily what we're hearing. And then the next slide here, we have 3 additional topics, one being infrastructure, public safety and services. And that's a very broad topic, but it basically covers roads, utilities, safety services, and that could also include improving schools and youth programs in the township. And then community engagement and local identity. is extremely important, ensuring that there's transparent planning and strengthening the township's unique identity. And then finally, as far as some threats and challenges and how we address those, two topics, limiting sprawl, environmental risks, and then prioritizing maintenance and sustainability are important findings. And then kind of moving on to the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We asked this question in the online survey, and then we also presented it in the form of a mapping activity at the engagement event so far. So what you're seeing here is a combination of those responses that we got that were written responses and also those that were placed on the map. And so some of the strengths that we heard are East Fork State Park, the farms and rural lands, and then schools and public services. Weaknesses were primarily focused on the traffic and the sewer system along State Route 125. And so that's where you'll see that string of yellow dots there leading from the western edge of the township into the center of the township there. As far as opportunities go, people see the roadway as a weakness, but also as an opportunity for improvement. So State Route 125, the village of Bethel has come up a lot as an opportunity site. And while the township doesn't have any control over what they do, coordinating those opportunities with the village of Bethel is an important part of this planning process. They've also identified East Fork State Park. There are some opportunities there for improvements. And then threats were pretty scattered throughout the township, but mainly people see the sewer system as a primary threat. The intersection of Airport Road and Patterson Road came up a few times. And then junk accumulation is pretty scattered throughout the township, but it was also identified as a threat. And then from that initial, look at, what are people saying? Well, we're trying to organize that into some planning themes so that way we can give you guys the information that you need to help kind of make decisions on what improvements are needed. So we've organized those responses into 4 planning themes in which we'll expand upon as we draft a comprehensive plan. So first we have rural character and agricultural land. And so I have a brief description there, which basically means safeguard the township's farmland, natural views, and peaceful lifestyle from overdevelopment. We have infrastructure and public services, maintaining and enhancing those systems that serve residents and businesses. And then we have smart and sustainable growth, which means supporting growth that's well planned, environmentally responsible, and economically viable. And then finally, we have kind of a larger topic area, which is the local economy, community identity, and public spaces. So supporting local businesses, promoting community pride and gathering spaces, and preserving the township's unique character. And so how we utilize these planning themes are we create a series of goals and objectives based on that. And that gives you guys direction as development proposals come through for things you can look to. And so again, what we've done here is we've organized a series of draft goals and the number of responses we've got at the Empower Youth Conference, where we showed the public, what those draft goals are. So we have 5 goals for rural character and agricultural land, supporting local farms and rural businesses. That was kind of the top answer as far as what people think should be included in the comprehensive plan is what the question was, and so we've got 8 responses for that. And then second was protect farmland and open views from overdevelopment. Third, limit dense housing in rural areas. 4, preserve historic sites and rural heritage. And 5, keep scenic roads natural and attractive. We saw a limited number of responses for that. And so, what a lower amount of responses might mean is that might be, a weaker goal or something that we need to improve upon throughout the planning process. And so you guys have access to all these goals here in your packets. So I encourage you to read those over, and let us know, if we're on the right track with those. And so I'm gonna go ahead and skip ahead here.
Can you go back one?
Yeah.
So, yeah, sure. So purpose of those goals to kind of zoom back out is really the goals will help to kind of achieve these overall descriptions. So when we're looking at those goals, those are things or areas where we're looking, the township would be looking to get to achieve that rural character and agricultural land descriptor that the township is looking to achieve throughout this planning process. Under each one of those goals would then be objectives or some actionable items that the township is able to prioritize each year as you're looking for projects or programs or policies. This can kind of serve as a guiding document that you can refer back to and live that you can kind of check yourself throughout each one of the fiscal years to see, are we actually getting closer to this goal? Are we in line with what the community as a whole throughout this process has given input from? So these are the numbers that we have so far. By all means, people are watching or here. We're looking to increase these numbers. So this is really the plan that you all are writing. We're just kind of organizing it, but that's kind of the purpose between these goals and those descriptors. So we're looking to kind of validate these goal statements, and when there is validation of them, that provides us the ability to kind of dig a little bit further into the weeds and see what kind of tools are out there, whether it's a county program, a state program, something that could be a grassroots effort to help to be more actionable items to achieve these goals. Sorry.
You're good. So under those four planning themes, we have the goals listed here that you can take a look at further. We have infrastructure and public services, and then on the second page here we have the smart and sustainable growth theme, and then local economy, community identity, and public spaces. And so as part of this next phase, we'll be looking into how do we improve those and also provide objectives for them, for how to accomplish those goals over time.
So with that overview, wanted to get feedback, any discussion that's around. I know kind of the main focus on tonight's meeting, I think, is going to be kind of overviewing the zoning resolution, but we wanted to at least provide what we've heard so far, the input that we've gotten from each one of the public engagement meetings and the surveys that are online. See if we're moving in the right direction, if we need to adjust or pivot. So wanted to kind of open it up to anybody that has any feedback or comments, questions.
That's not after we're done with this update, but it's like schedule, would you want to like update it once a year or as come basis, or I've never heard anybody talk about that yet, but like a checkup at the doctor, you do it once a year or every 2 years or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, so I think Tate is unique in a sense where right now there is no adopted comprehensive plan on the books. There are several plans that are in place, but it's not a comprehensive plan that the county recognizes. So this is kind of forming the first one to outline the priorities of the township. What typically you see is that on an annual basis, the township as a whole kind of looks at it, trustees, the zoning commission, the board of zoning appeals. As you're using the document, you can kind of see, is this working, is it not? There might be some things that need to be updated along the way. So those could be typically minor changes. It's not typical that you completely update it or do revisions on an annual basis, but it's always good to kind of monitor it to make sure it's still tracking with what the township's vision is.
So you may be, just to clarify,
Yeah.
so you might be, for example, at the end of the year, getting together to say, hey, we've seen a lot of variance requests on this issue, or we've seen a lot of sticking points on XYZ provision. Is there a way we can, should we update those different provisions that are sort of creating issues to smooth the way or to adjust the variance requests that we're seeing or things like that?
Sure. So those would typically be more along the lines of the zoning resolution themselves. I think one of the main things that would come out of if there's a need to do
an intermediate update to the comprehensive plan if there was, you know, an unforeseen development that, you know, is the once in a lifetime thing that couldn't be contemplated throughout this process. You know, that might impact a lot, so you might have to revisit it at that stage. Kind of on an annual basis, when we get into that implementation and we get into those action items, you know, on an annual basis, it should be able to be where, you know, the township looks at it and says, yes, we accomplished this, yes, we accomplished this, this is our priority for next year, is to kind of focus on these action items to help us achieve those goals. So it kind of serves as, kind of like you would look at a budget, this kind of helps you look at where you want to focus some planning efforts, in a sense. But kind of going back, typically these plans are updated every 5 to 10 years. It's supposed to be a look 20 to 30 years in the future, but you want to make sure that you're revisiting it every 5 to 10 years to do an update.
And if I might add, it's there's been some concerns out there about getting all this done. I've heard at the county level several times about how we have the worst zoning code in Claremont County. So that's coming from pretty important people at the county level, and so that's another reason that it's very important we update this, especially with the changes that are coming our way drastically fast. And the other thing is in order for us doing the 30-year land use plan, this will also, any grants or anything that we apply for, it all goes off the points. A lot of people know that. A lot of people do not know that. But and all these different things that you have together scores you more points to be able to maybe win that grant. That's basically what we're doing. We're putting in a bid for it. So it's, they told us right now, with no land use plan, basically, I know there was one that was put together in '97, but it wasn't filed or anything like that, so it's not anything on file. So with no land use plan, I mean, you saw by the survey that was taken that sewer is a #1 important thing down 125 of a lot of the township residents. Well, they already told us without a land use plan, there won't be any assistance from the county or the state without it. So that's why this is so important.
John, can you clarify they?
Water resources. Your water
Because you're
resources
just
said
saying
that we
they
have to have this
has no
plan.
contact.
The county and the state level said that unless we have, they want to see that the township has their act together and have a plan for the future before they give any money, so that way it doesn't just get blown, and they want to make sure it gets put to good use. So that's that is the main reason this has to be done now. It should have been done 20 years ago. But it's all dumping in our laps right now because the growth is coming after so fast. And like I said, there's a lot of concerns with some people. And I'd like to also add the fact that we're doing both of them. We consulted with the consultants and asked them up front, should we do one plan or the other? And we saved, I think, roughly off the top of my head, I think it was about $60,000 we saved by putting both of them doing it together versus doing one at a time, because a lot of their facts that they'd be doing, they're not doubling their time doing them separately. So it saves us money by doing them together. So that, I know that's been a major concern. So it's these.
Well, and the funding had to be.
Yeah, and the funding had to be used or we'd lose it, right? And that wouldn't be responsible. And like I said, I mean, a lot of townships on the ARPA fund, or some people call it COVID money, they used it for like maintenance buildings. They put it toward the roads. We thought it'd be wise. Basically, we had the fire department, we had the zoning, and we had the street. So we tried to split the money up. The majority of the money went to fire hydrants, which is public safety. And then the other two, like I said, we redid Moore Road, the middle section of Moore Road last year. That was all for free out of this money. And now we're doing the zoning code out of this. So it's being very responsible and making sure that we're distributing the money as fairly as possible between the three groups. And that's why this is so important, that we have to get this done, or we're going to get left behind, and we're not going to get any assistance on this, anything from the county or the state level. And let's face it, we have to have their assistance to get the funding to help do this, because we can't afford to do it on our own. Right?
Andy, I had a question. When you talked about seeking to validate some of the, for example, like the goals and the things that were presented at the Empowered Youth I know we validated some of the themes of memory served sort of at that event. But what are some ways or how do we go about sort of validating and continuing to validate the data we've received so far?
Yeah, so I think it'd be helpful for us to, obviously, we're gonna be putting all of this, online so the public can review it. But I think, given the numbers that we've received at the Empower Youth picnic, for, those that agreed with the goals or those that didn't, we didn't have anybody that disagreed with the goals. I think there was one that was a sticker on a no. But that kind of showed us that we're on the right track. So we want to make sure that probably look to have an online survey similar to what we did in the first phase, for those goals to just reiterate, are we on the right track before we spend time and effort going into actionable items that help to achieve those. So I think we'll look to put those out there again just to make sure. We'll probably have, a window of how long that's going to be open because we want to make sure that we're still, hitting the timeline that we need to make for being able to get this approved. So, but that being said, we also want to make sure that what's being reviewed and approved is collectively understood that this is the, so.
Yeah, just a quick question. Do you expect the result of the comprehensive plan to result in a map of land use, similar to what the zoning map is we have today?
Yep.
You're gonna say this is gonna stay agricultural, this could go retail, this could go multifamily or residential?
Yeah, so that's kind of one of the next phases or one of the later phases in this. We want to make sure that we understand what the township is looking for. One of the most important parts of this whole process is going to be that future land use plan or future land use map. So
It'll be a map.
Yep.
Okay.
So it's different from what the existing land use shows where, this is what is recorded as the use of the property, whether it's single family, whether it's being used as commercial, whatever it might be. This will be a map that shows what the township is looking for it to look like, in 30 years. So there's probably going to be a lot of land, obviously, that's still tagged as being agricultural. I don't think that's going to be any surprise. The development pressures are real, they're happening, so we want to understand where that should be harnessed, and that future land use map will help to identify where those areas are. It's not something that, we kind of take a very initial stab at this is what kind of we understand is what a future land use map would look like based off of the input. But we, again, like we would with the goals and the action steps, we look to validate that. So we would have
Is there something individual landowners would have to say in?
They're more than welcome to be at the table. I mean, we're looking for that input, so absolutely.
But to be clear,
Yeah.
the comprehensive land use map doesn't change any existing zone,
No,
correct?
no,
So
it does not.
it doesn't change anything. How it's zoned now, it stays that way. The comprehensive land use plan just sort of says, hey, if we get development requests, we've identified this area of the map where that kind of development makes sense. So we're gonna target those kinds of development requests to those particular areas. But it doesn't change, like for example, if you're zoned residential and in our land use plan, maybe we identify that as potentially one day being a commercial corridor, it doesn't change your residential zoning to commercial like that. Like that doesn't
They
happen.
would have to change the zoning.
Absolutely. So I do want to be clear because I think that is really easy to misunderstand, and for a while I didn't exactly understand how that worked either, because obviously we want to understand sort of where as a township we're going, but we want to make clear we're not taking property, we're not changing the uses, we're not looking to take and do any of that through this process. This is identifying a plan where we want to go one day as development comes in, or as people move out, right? If you've got folks who are currently, for example, living on 125 and they decide, hey, I don't want to live on a road where there's so much traffic, and they leave, if that property is available, that might be one where if we're getting commercial requests, we identify it as, hey, this could be changed to a commercial zone based on our land use plan. would you like to go here? That kind of thing. Does that make sense? Thanks for asking that, because I don't want people to think that, yeah, I don't want them to think it's any kind of, this map is decided and, you know, bam, your property changes, because that's not what we're doing.
Who determines the land use for the land? I guess everybody.
The people.
Yeah.
That's why we keep telling everybody, come to these
That's
meetings,
what
we
we're
want your
trying-
input.
Yeah.
That's why we're saying, go online, get the survey, take that survey, because we want all 10,000 people to put in their comments on what this is. And the reason we have to do this is we will have builders come to us and say, hey, we'd like to build a complex in your township. And then we're gonna say, okay, our people wanna see it located in this side of town, and this is where we would recommend that you look at and see if that's what they're looking for.
And the mapping doesn't come until a little further down, correct?
I'd probably say we'll probably be in that late summer, early fall, based off of this timeline.
Based on this kind of information, right? Because from a timeline perspective, we're sort of gathering what the community vision is, and then we look to sort of put it together in map form, and then that is, of course, available for comment and validation and yeses or nos, or, you know, what does that look like? So we're not anywhere close to that yet, yeah, but that would be the deliverable.
And I just wanna add a comment on kind of the vein, I think, what I'm hearing from your question too is, in the event even property or certain patch of property was rezoned, that's not kicking anybody out of their property or stopping their use of their property. This, even if you go to say, like, to Ms. Steinley's point, that somebody lives on 125 as a house, if that, you know, if 5 or 8 properties in a row were rezoned as a commercial target, they certainly have input on that process. They have their voice in the process as well. But that, if the zoning designation of the property changes, it doesn't stop the existing or pre-existing use. So if my house is there and it's agricultural and it zones to commercial too, I don't have to sell my house and move. But what it may mean for me is that when I go to sell my house, someone is going to buy it, build something, not give me more for it because it's already zoned and designated for commercial.
Well, is it possible to change the valuation and taxes? Just rezoning it maybe?
No,
Not likely.
because the auditor, I've had a lot of questions about that recently too. Now realtors look at the county auditor's site, they're telling people what zoning of a property is based on the auditor's valuation. The two are completely disconnected. The auditor's valuation is based on the use of the property. So if it's zoned industrial, but the county sees it as single family residence, you're gonna tax it as a residential single family by the lot.
For agriculture.
You know, if it's zoned agricultural, but it's in a residential area, they're probably gonna tax it as a residential vacant lot instead of an ag vacant. So when it comes to taxes, that's a county auditor question, and they have appeals processes for that if tax code don't line up with what's actually.
I've seen that happen in Hammond County.
Yeah, one of the most number one things they wind up doing is somebody builds a single barn or a building on a piece of property, they start thinking them for commercial building. But, you know, zoning is also not intended entirely. Plan will guide the zoning, so when somebody considers a zone change or brings in an application, zoning commission then looks at the plan and says, does this request match our long-term planning? Is this on our roadmap? Is this a goal of the township that we have? So that rather than just working in a vacuum, in a silo of this particular case, we're looking at the broader picture overall. So they work hand in hand.
That example he just gave you, it's not just the board saying, okay, we're going to allow this, because the board's going back to the map, which the people said this is what we'd like to see. And then the board is going to go follow by the guidelines that the people gave us. I mean, that's all
Well,
it
and
is.
then there's the public input process too,
Yes,
so we get comment
So
sort of
it's-
at 2 different places.
It's not like there's a group out here dictating what everything's going to be. It's not. The group is the township.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, that's, to me, that's one of the main important things about future land use map. You know, I serve on a planning commission where I live, and we don't really have a good future
land use map. So when we're up there making zoning decisions for, should this property be rezoned to industrial, you kind of look at the surroundings to say, does this make sense, instead of looking at, what the community recognized in the future land use map. If that application came to us and that future land use map said that it should be, the vision is for it to be residential, that application is completely inconsistent with that, so that's not gonna get my recommendation of approval.
Right.
So it's really painting that whole picture. And then to kind of go back a little bit for the future land use map, what we'll do when we kind of take that first iteration to, based off of the input, but we'll also take a look at what is the recorded land use of all of these properties. What does it make sense? Should it be that exact same thing, or does the recorded land use differentiate from what the existing zoning is? So there's a lot of different map layering that takes place. We want to make sure that we get it right. And kind of to the point of how the future land use map is informed by the previous goals that we've identified or that have been identified. If we're hearing the community say, well, we want more commercial properties, we want more commercial businesses. Okay, well, when we get to that future land use map, we're gonna ask the question, where? So, if we're hearing that from this first phase and we get to that future land use plan and we're having trouble saying, well, I'm comfortable with commercial here, here, are we really looking for there to be more commercial? So it comes to kind of validate that in a sense too, or, let's direct residential development. Well, what kind and where should it be if we're getting development pressure?
And
What
something
kind of
else,
utilities are available?
Exactly.
and something else that you need to look at here is, a lot of people are, everybody's got different things. Some people say they want to see nothing but residential growth, and then some people say they want to see a little bit of small business growth. Something we also need to take into consideration here is if you have a lot of residential growth, that still puts a hardship, I won't say a hardship, that still puts an expense onto the schools because there's an average 2.5 kids per household. So if you let nothing but residential come in and build, well, that's also building other expenses for the school. So where, I'm not here for a big industrial parks or nothing like that by far, not even close. But we need to let some businesses come in here because when you let some businesses come in here, that is free money for the school because there's 0 kids going to there. That business might bring in some employees that might move into the area, but overall, that business piece of property, that commercial property, puts no expense on the school. So that money that they're going to improve, instead of getting $1,200 a year, they could be getting $12,000 a year. Well, that is going to be free money to the school, and we all know we got school people here. Our school needs that. So everybody needs to keep an open mind that we do need some commercial growth here.
And I think it's important to know too, that most of us up here, we have been on the zoning commission for quite a while. And in 13 years, we would get maybe 1 or 2 sporadically throughout the year. We are getting a lot of zoning asks. So to have a plan in place and to know what globally we want, you're on 125, that does make sense that a business should go there. And I think there's going to need to be a lot of push and pull of the whole community, but we are growing and we need to grow because if not,
Yes.
we're all feeling, like John said, the financial struggles everywhere. So people are wanting to come here and we are getting a lot more action than we ever have in previous years. So we need a plan.
I tell some of these people, the BZA used to be the busiest of the boards because it had all these different things. It's going to start reversing here within the next year or 2 because the zoning commission, like I said, all these changes that are coming, this board is going to get more activity.
I think it is important that we have commercial as well as businesses. But what we don't want is Amelia, and you can't get in and out. It's going to take you 30 minutes just to get from here to Amelia. I don't know if there's any thought given to roads maybe running parallel to 125 for the businesses, so we don't have businesses coming in and out of 125 all the time.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? Because I think that makes things more difficult to get through, to navigate, all of that. given some thought to running roads parallel to 125, because a lot of towns will eventually get bypassed, and that's what happens as well.
Well, prime example, State Route 32 is supposed to be a bypass, and 125, look at it. I mean, I remember in the 70s when it was being built, that's what the whole purpose was for, is just to keep traffic off of 125. Look what it has. So, yeah, I agree, you're right there.
Yeah, traffic is definitely a concern. And I think we always heavy on everybody that's around here to understand, we do make these decisions, and even as we're looking from a planning perspective, right, which we're speaking more hypothetical, right, or where are we going, but even if you think about that and you identify a plan, right, like it flows nicely and you know, everything kind of builds up and it looks good, I think we have to think carefully about, okay, but what about the burdens on the infrastructure, right? If we do have more people that come, it's the schools, but it's the traffic and it's some of the other public services. It's, you know, we only have certain places where sewer is or where it could easily be extended, and what does that look like, right? So I think all of those things are really important to consider so that the plan we create doesn't have to be completely redone in just a couple of years, right? I think those are paramount to consider as we're thinking through these things, and to think and even potentially identify goals and objectives that, like, hey, we've got to find some sort of support for 125. And what does that look like? What can that look like?
And then have we also looked at what other communities are doing? And I know there is a New Richmond, I think at one point there was going to be another bridge. They were going to put around New Richmond to connect 71, I think, at one point. So I'm not sure if that's still in the works or not, but I know that there was a master plan for that, and so that would come into play with what we're doing here.
So, kind of to build off of that, so in that instance, in that example, you look at infrastructure and public services, goal number 2, make roads safer and more efficient. So an action step could be, you know, investigate the street network surrounding 125. And it might be something where, I mean, that's typically a more in-depth transportation engineering lift, where you're kind of focused on that initial corridor. So having a specific goal and an action step related to that, you know, when it gets to a point where those are becoming more of a reality, you can do a deeper dive to that specific subject matter and say, hey, this is something that we've identified. Let's dive deeper and figure out what the, you know, logistics are around.
That's even something that we can start working towards sooner rather than later, so that we've got those kinds of things in place to deal with development as it comes, rather than getting that development and then having to backpedal and scramble real fast to figure out a way that it doesn't completely overburden our system, right? But if we've got these kinds of goals, we can sort of then create, and as you were talking about before, some of those yearly objectives and action items as to, okay, but how do we do that, right? Like, all of that sounds great, but how do we get there? Okay, that makes sense.
After talking with the commissioners, meeting with them, you know, the steps we need to go through, they told us they would help us out. We get a plan together, water resources will help us out, the county was, and they pretty much guaranteed some money automatically. So
Definitely provides us with some credibility, doesn't it?
So it's, you know, like they told us, it's coming this way. You guys better be prepared or else.
We looked into, it keeps coming up, the 125 sewer is 2.4 miles, and we looked and see what it was. We put it into process and got it going about getting that sewer put in. Our next procedure, the next thing they require out of us is a land use plan. So that's why we're,
And here
again,
we are.
yeah.
They told us.
That's why this is so important that we have to do
Right.
this.
So it would help us.
What other thoughts, comments, feedback?
I just have a question, and this is a public meeting. On the surveys, there's chatter everywhere. Well, they're gonna make these decisions on little input from the surveys. The amount of people that participated, the 250 some plus, is that an average?
Like, based on the, like, other communities and what kind of levels of
Yes.
engagement they see?
Yes.
So the numbers that we put up there were the numbers that we've experienced from Tate. Percentage-wise, based off of the population, is right about in line with what we get engagement-wise from other municipalities.
Thank you.
So,
That's because Chatter's out there, all the people, they're making the decisions. You can't force people to fill out the surveys. You can't, I feel the boards are doing their best. I live in American Township and they have done nothing like what they do here to get it out to the public. So I'm glad to hear that. I'm like, is that low or is that?
And our largest engagement was the online survey. Besides the empowering.
Yeah.
and that's one of the things I want to bring up. I mean, we can all sit around and come up with ideas for how to engage people, but if there are other ideas, like by all means, like we want to make sure that we're doing what we need. I mean, I think the pop-up event at Empower Youth, because there was already going to be a collective amount of people there, they cycled right in. I mean, that's more enticing than holding, an isolated event. So I think we learned a lesson from that, and we can continue to build on that. I think coming up with something where we're able to harness input, maybe a bird fest or whatever it might be. I mean, those are opportunities that we want to make sure that we're, taking.
Here, we're celebrating 220th anniversary at Book Fest.
Okay.
Here was, and August, that's what, August 30th.
Well, Brad, these more surveys is 3 feet.
The route always works. The route always works.
I did. I posted a lot of stuff.
Oh,
In this township.
The cleanup
So I got a lot of free.
There's a big
banner
sign,
out here in the middle
I mean, right by the Brett Memorial Building.
They've done, I don't know what it's for.
No, it's the
July
30th.
12th.
And you know how the road
I don't
is
know.
there.
I don't know, there's something big in the park on July 12th.
I saw the sign, I saw the banner up there, yeah.
I live there.
I don't know,
I'll drive under it.
I didn't run away,
I've
I
never
mean,
seen a
let us
survey
know,
on
and if it's
my
something where we
website.
can put something together quick and get additional feedback. I mean, that's exactly what we're looking for. Yep, perfect.
And they.
I don't know, I saw it as I was driving in on the road.
Okay, yeah, we'll have to look
Yeah,
at
even a
it.
By the way, I really like the banner,
But you didn't read it
the,
because you were.
billboard, right from the 5 and 10.
Right, I mean, we got a part of it, right, Ron?
You have seen it?
So I think kind of along those veins, and I want to make sure that we're kind of
I know, Brad,
moving along and
I
being
understand.
respectful of everybody's time.
If the website's not.
Kind of go into the zoning resolution update. So we kind of ended the comprehensive plan update on, how do we implement or how do we practice what is being put into the comprehensive plan? Talk about the future land use map and how that will inform, zone change applications from developers or from, whoever is submitting a zone change application. The other end of that is the policy that goes along with that, and that's the zoning resolution update. So as mentioned, the existing zoning resolution is pretty dated. I think the last major amendment of it all was, I think 2007 is what the cover shows, but I know that there's been some text amendments that have taken place. You went through the solar text last year. So we want to make sure that we're taking everything that's happening and incorporating it into an updated zoning resolution that, encompasses what's working currently in the existing resolution, what the township is looking to see, any new uses. So we're talking, accessory dwelling units, we're talking, I know it's kind of a controversial subject depending on where it is, but the medicinal marijuana or recreational marijuana, not to say that we're looking to add those in, but we want to understand. Yes, exactly. What does the township want to see for some of these uses that are becoming, that are interested in locating in the township, whether it's, tiny home, I mean, any number of things, any number of topics. So we're really looking to see how the township wants to address these things. Even aside from that, just anything, and make sure that you guys have a zoning resolution that works for you, works for staff, works for the commission, and the residents when they're doing improvements on their property. So it's not looking to add additional restrictions, it's what kind of things can be put in place to safeguard what makes Tate Township Tate Township. So that's really what the overall purpose of a zoning resolution update is.
So again, it's really a development guide for the comprehensive plan. How do we get there from a policy aspect for land use and zoning practices? So the things that we're really looking to see with the zoning resolution update is consistency. We want to make sure that all the terminology, all the cross references are all consistent throughout it. Modernize the terminology, modernize it for making sure that agricultural terminology is up to date. Residential terminology is up to date. Make sure that it actually, when somebody comes into the township or somebody that lives in the township is looking to do improvements, they're not using an antiquated code that doesn't really fit today's development. Organization accessibility, we want to make sure that the code is easy to use, easy to read, easy to understand in any format that people want to see, whether it's a hard copy that works for them, whether it's an online platform, whatever it might be, we want to make sure that it's well organized and that people are able to use it. Increase ease of use and understanding. And again, it's a tool for implementing plans and studies. So whether it's this comprehensive plan, if there is a more focused plan for the 125 corridor or whatever it might be, the purpose behind this is really to make sure that those ideas can be implemented when there is that development interest or there is that public will to make those improvements. So some of the challenges right now, and I think Shelby can probably talk on a lot of these since he lives and breathes this code every day. Navigation and references, we want to make sure that those are shored up. Clear intent of the district classification, so understanding what the difference is between the ag district, what it should be, what the R1, R2, R3 districts are. Instead of it just being a number, maybe it's a named district where there's a clear purpose and intent so anybody can understand I live in this district, this is the purpose, this is the built environment around it. Subjectivity and objectivity, we want to make sure that these things are measurable and they're observable, not something that can be very fluid in interpretation. Right now there's the cumulative zoning or a pyramidal zoning structure where any use that's permitted within a C1 district or a B1 district is permitted within the B2, is permitted in B3. Does that necessarily make sense? In some instances it does, and we'll go into that. I know that's kind of diving a little bit deep into the weeds, but we want to make sure that the uses that are permitted within the districts really meet the intent of that district and are appropriate to the surrounding areas. And then update any outdated language in uses. So I know that not just Tate's zoning resolution, but any number of zoning resolutions or zoning codes we look at, there are uses that are defined that are no longer in existence. So we want to make sure that anything that's just adding to a lengthy document can be removed if it's an antiquated use or an antiquated term. So this is the existing zoning resolution structure. I'm not going to go into it, but you've got each of the different sections. And what I didn't add onto this was there are an additional, how many different appendices are there? Three? Yeah, there's 3 additional appendixes that are referenced throughout the resolution. So this is what we're talking about with really organizing, making sure that it's easy to understand. The one thing I just right off the bat that comes out is there's a section or a chapter on Board of Zoning Appeals, but there's not a chapter or article on the zoning commission. So, where would somebody look that's unfamiliar with the code to figure out what the roles, responsibilities are for the zoning commission? So, I think kind of clearing some of those things up is really what we're looking at with the zoning resolution update. So it's not just what kind of content, but really how the code works or how the resolution works. When we look at a zoning resolution update, we break it down into different chunks, so it's not we're just doing this whole thing at once. Here you go, have fun reviewing it. So we want to break it down into bite-sized chunks. So this first batch that I think we're looking to focus on, and you've got kind of a early draft, kind of how it could look, is a focus really on district and boundaries thereof, the general provisions applicable to all zoning districts, and then zoning district regulations. So we would tie those into 2 different chapters. So chapter Article 2 and Article 3. I'll kind of go over what the breakdown is of how we would recommend organizing the code. But Article 2 would focus on the zoning districts themselves, and then Article 3 would focus on all of the uses that come are allowed within those districts. So what the zoning district article would address, the zoning map and boundaries, so it established the fact that there is a zoning map, how those zoning district boundaries are interpreted, so if a property is split right down the middle, half of it is R1, half of it is B1 or a C1 district, so half of it's residential, half of it's commercial. What does that mean? How is that interpreted? So putting language to really clarify so it's not as ambiguous. And then coming up with district purpose statements and intent. So like I mentioned earlier, what is the difference between the residential 1, the residential 2, and the residential 3? Well, you will know that if you just dig in, but if you can add just a purpose statement, just a quick blurb, it gives everybody an understanding as to what that actually is. In your current code or your current zoning resolution, we're going to reference that Article 2, zoning districts and boundaries thereof. Take a look at what language is working, incorporate it, and then if there are gaps that exist within the current code and what we have seen in other townships, similar communities, we're going to look to introduce or propose language to you all to get your feedback to see if that's something that you want to incorporate into your zoning resolution. So it's not like we're going to come with language to say this is what you need to do. In some instances we probably might, because there might be things that you ought to have in your resolution that you might not currently. But if it's something that doesn't work for Tate, it doesn't work for Tate, and we can strike it out. So we just want to make sure that the language is out there for people to review and give us input on. And then use regulations, we would introduce a use table so you can see what uses are permitted within each district on a quick matrix, rather than have to go through each one of the different pages and read down the list and see, it's permitted in this district, is it permitted in this district? You got to quick go back. Use regulations will go over principal uses, so what the property is actually used for. It also goes into accessory uses and accessory structures. So, think of fences, think of accessory structures as far as detached garages, utility sheds, things of that nature. Any type of use that goes on a property, we would be putting into this chapter, so it's all in one place. And again, looking at your existing zoning resolution, you've got articles that are kind of spread out. We're looking to kind of bring those together into one spot, and this would be where those things live. So this next slide, probably going to look real messy, and that's fine. But what I wanted to show is we're not just starting from scratch. We're not just saying, this is what we think that your zoning resolution should look like. We're going to come up with things and see what you think. We're organizing what we think the code should look like. So you've got general provisions, which is kind of the legal aspect of the code, zoning districts, use regulations, dimensional design standards, so that'll go into building height, setbacks, things of that nature. Outdoor lighting, if that's something that you're interested in, you can add it. If not, get rid of it. Landscaping and buffering, again, a lot of codes will have that in there. So these are just typical articles that a code or resolution would have, and this is kind of how we see it organized. What we did was take a look at your existing resolution and see what existing chapters or articles or sections would plug into that. It's kind of the saying, you don't want to see how sausage is made, you don't want to see necessarily behind the scenes, but I want to be transparent and show that, we're taking a look at what is working with the code, what regulations are in place, what is making the zoning resolution reflect what Tate Township is, take those nuggets, plug them in, and then see where the gaps are and fill those in based off of your input. So again, what we're looking at first, and what we're going to discuss a little bit more, is the zoning districts and the use regulations. Those other ones will come later, but again, it's all part of this process. So zoning districts themselves, what we did is we didn't want to throw too much at you too soon, so I just kind of want to walk through how this is structured. We focus on districts that have to do with agricultural and rural. So what you'll see kind of as you dive in your packets, Article 2 is broken up into different sections. So the first section just goes over general regulations. Again, as I mentioned, setting up the zoning map as an official document, district boundaries, and then compliance with the district standards, and then establishing the zoning districts. There's a matrix that I'll show you here in a second, but what we'll kind of overview, just so you can have an understanding for how it can look, is we're looking at the agricultural district, rural residential, and a commercial rural. So instead of going with an R1, this would be something where it's a very low density residential district that would serve as kind of a transition from agricultural land, agricultural operations into more dense or more suburban, whatever it might be, just residential that's not compatible with agricultural. So serving as kind of a transition for that. Same thing with commercial rural, looking at uses that would be compatible with rural living, that serve the surrounding area specifically, not something where it's big box stores. So just kind of coming up with a framework around those. So I know the question has been out there, is this process rezoning property? The answer is no. What we're doing is the existing districts where you've got an R1 or C1, and we're still trying to figure out, what the compatibility would be and how the uses that are permitted, the built environment, what that all looks like. But it's really kind of a 1-for-1 is the way that we are seeing it. Is, it might be that a rural residential is consistent with your existing R1. It might not be, but we want to make sure that we're looking at those things. We're not going through and proposing that, this property on State Route 125 should be rezoned. That's not the purpose of this. It's to really set up all the properties within Tate Township into these categories and moving forward. So this would be a table that's listed in the zoning code, and you can see it's got, what the abbreviation would be, so what the zoning designation is, what the district name is. The equivalency would be what it was previously, or what the previous designation was, not saying that it's being rezoned, but what just the previous name was. So that way, if somebody says, well, my property's zoned, R2. Well, it's still R2, but it's just named now RL, in a sense. And then there would be these locations for where the purpose statement would be, and kind of a one-sheeter for, so you can see all the things that are permitted within that district. So as an example, an agricultural district, putting a purpose statement behind it, intended to preserve and protect townships' prime farmland, open spaces, and agricultural operations from encroachments of incompatible development. This district prioritizes agriculture as a principal land use, limiting residential and non-agricultural development to minimize conflicts, fragmentation of productive lands. The AG district would also serve to protect rural landscapes, support agricultural economies, and ensure viability of working lands for future generations. Again, these are draft purpose statements, something to kind of react to, but this is what we would kind of see as an overall intent for an agricultural district. Right now, on the left-hand side, you'll see when you go into the current zoning resolution, this is how the agricultural district is outlined. It talks about all the uses permitted, whether they're permitted by right, permitted with special exceptions, or uses that are prohibited. So I'll go into that a little bit in a minute, but what we would have in that Article 2 is it would have the zoning district's purpose statement, and then kind of a snapshot for things that are in the code later in more depth. But that way, say Shelby's going out to a property and somebody says, well, what actually can I do with my property? I'm in an agricultural district. He can print off this sheet and say, this is what your district intent is. These are what uses are permitted by right, conditional use. These are accessory uses that are permitted or temporary uses. And then it has, what the applicable setback standards might be, minimum lot sizes, all that stuff. That way it's just in one quick snapshot for you all. Same thing with rural residential. Again, read that verbatim, but very low density residential development in areas where maintaining the rural character is a priority. It serves as a transition between agricultural land and more developed residential areas. That's probably a better way to say it than what I said. Supporting large lot single family homes. So I kind of want to tie that statement back to what we've heard from
the input that we've received, there was a visual preference board, and one of the pictures that we got a lot of dots on was single-family homes on large tracts of land. So this district is kind of catered towards how that could be implemented, or how that type of visual preference can translate into policy and into practice. And that this district would help to absorb growth pressures without undermining the rural qualities. So again, same kind of thing, taking the long list there and paring it down into one quick snapshot. Rural commercial, again, these another example district. It's not something that, you know, is by any stretch of the imagination a done deal, but a thought based off of what the input we've received from the comprehensive plan is small scale, low intensity commercial uses that serve daily needs of rural residents. So this could be, you know, potentially a district that could apply at an intersection in a very heavily agricultural area. Somebody wants to open up a farm supply store. This district could be appropriate for that because it's intended to blend in with that type of a environment, rather than, you know, a commercial district that allows for strip centers or things that aren't necessarily compatible or appropriate with an agricultural district. So those are kind of the big picture things that we're really looking at this point, and then we'll start to kind of dig into if this is what we're looking to have, or if this is what Tate Township's looking to have, what uses would be appropriate within a district like that. The uses that are permitted within the districts like that would be defined then in the use regulations chapter. So right now, I just kind of did a example. Say somebody is looking at opening a personal service use within the C3 district. So somebody would look to the C3 district and they would see the permitted use list and say, this is everything that's permitted within the C3 district. Well, it doesn't have anything listed there about personal service uses. So is it actually permitted? Well, it says any use or structure permitted as regulated in the C2 district is permitted, except hereinafter modified. So then that individual would have to go to the C2 district to see, is a personal service use permitted?
What's personal service?
So it'd be like a barber shop, like karate,
Nail salon.
yeah, like the yoga studio, like things like that. Like something where you go in there, they provide a service based off for you. And again, all of those uses and in the packets as well would be definitions for every single use. So it's very clear what those uses would be. So again, same kind of scenario. It's not listed there, so you would have to then see, okay, is it something that's permitted in the C2? C2 district doesn't specifically state personal service uses are permitted, but it does say you can go to the C1 district for permitted uses.
And this is really how it's read. It's horrible.
Yeah.
This is the current language.
So a lot of
There's
page
a lot of
flipping.
flipping, right?
A lot of flipping.
Yeah, go back.
And incomplete.
Back and forth.
And to that point, and I'm glad you asked what is personal service. I mean, all of the definition or all of the terms that there would be that ambiguity to it would be clearly defined in the last article of the zoning resolution. So it almost serves as a glossary for the entire resolution. That's kind of the intent. It can be something where a text definition does the job, that's great. If not, we'd look to introduce graphics or, you know, schematics or flow charts, whatever it might be, whatever makes it easier, we're looking to incorporate that into this update.
Question for you, have you run into problems when you separate these things out? The way it is now where you gotta keep going backwards, but when you actually copy everything in each section, have you run into any issues with that?
How do you mean?
Maintenance and stuff like that, or whatever on the book itself, and you have to update something? I mean, cause I as a programming, I know you want to duplicate stuff, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
You run into problems with, I like the idea of separating out, cause I think that's good to deal with that.
Sure.
But I guess my concern is what kind of maintenance or update problems do you run into by separating them?
So it's not necessarily that it's
separated because it's gonna be all on one matrix itself, so you're able to see the list of all of the uses rather than it being separated the way that it is currently. I mean, I know here that can be a bit of a hassle because you've got to go back into each one of these. The benefit of this is it allows for kind of that handout solution. So this is a little bit more tasking to update. The use table itself that I'll show, that is very easy to update and make sure that everything is consistent. And that's really the intent, and I think it's something I've got just if we needed to reference it. But one of the districts mentions cemeteries, and then another district says cemeteries and mausoleums. So there's technically two different uses that are very similar, but they're listed as different terms within different districts. So eliminating those issues is something, we want to make sure, again, everything, consistency is key. So,
And I think it's important that we remember those things.
Yep.
Right, like where is it specifically located? Where is that level of definition so we can start to update it, like.
Yeah, I like the idea of sophistication, but I just want to bring the point, you gotta make sure you maintain, if you're gonna have it duplicated in 3 places, we gotta make sure we whoever does it updates it in all 3 places, it's exactly right.
and that brings up a couple points. So we talked about updating the comprehensive plan and how that's usually every 5 to 10 years as an overhaul. Zoning resolutions, it's not typical, it's that frequency probably every 10 to 20 years might be an overhaul of a zoning resolution. But if there are regulations that, do not work after this gets adopted, you can do a text amendment and make sure that it's working the way that it needs to be.
Yeah.
Obviously, our job is to make sure that there's not those quick amendments that need to take place, but the ability is there for there to be those amendments. I mean, I think a case example would be, you recently did a text amendment or going through for offices to define that way it's clear, same kind of thing. So if there's a new use that comes up, we didn't foresee that use X, Y, and Z that nobody contemplated is now a thing, it can be a text amendment to it. As far as catching all the references, this would be a searchable document, so you'd be able to see, like search for cemetery, for example, these are all the different references for it, so if we're looking to make any changes to that, here are all of the instances where we need to make sure that we update. So kind of similar to the way that Article 2 was structured, we would see Article 3 having kind of a purpose statement. This is what outlines the reason behind these use regulations. Outlining that within the use table that I'll show, P stands for permitted, P with S stands for permitted with standards. So it's permitted as long as the developer or property owner meet all of these criteria. And that purpose is really to make sure that adjacent land uses are compatible. So it's not going to cause a hindrance for, the next door neighbor that somebody's putting up, whatever might be in that. Conditional use, requires Board of Adjustment or Board of Zoning Appeals review and approval. Dash would be prohibited, so rather than list out in a district, these are all the prohibited uses. If this table has a dash where it's not listed, it's not permitted. Allowable uses, that's a tool that we can talk through if it's something that the township is interested in using. That would specifically apply to plan unit development. So if somebody is coming with a plan unit development, that tool would allow for the zoning resolution to say, these are all the allowable uses for a residential plan unit development where they come with a master plan. This could say only single family dwellings are allowed, or maybe it'd be single family and like a park. Well, if that particular development is not appropriate for a park, then as part of that plan development approval, the only permitted use would then be single family. That's getting into the weeds. We'll save that for another day. Sorry. Anyway, so this, instead of having the sheet for each one of the districts that lists out the uses, and this is in your packet as well, there would be these columns that outline what the zoning district themselves are. Then you can see all of the different uses that would be contemplated within the zoning resolution, broken down by agricultural uses, residential category, public and institutional, commercial, industrial, whatever it might be. And then, so say somebody is looking at opening an animal hospital, kennel, daycare, or training facility, or an animal veterinary office and clinic. Where can I do that? Look at the matrix and say, oh, it looks like it's a conditional use within a commercial rural district, or this is permitted with standards in that district. But there are specific use criteria that apply to it that need to be met in order for it to be a permitted use. And again, those criteria would be something where the purpose of it is to minimize the impacts or the negative impacts to surrounding property owners. So it's not necessarily a mechanism for the property to be overly regulated. The purpose of it is to really maintain the safety, health, general welfare of the properties around it. So you would then take a look at what that section references, be able to click on it or refer to section 3.08A, see what those additional use standards might be. A lot of times with these particular uses, it has to do with animals outside. It's inappropriate within that specific district. In all likelihood, the answer is yes, especially for a place like where there's wildlife or there is farm animals. But that's, again, those are some of the things that we see in a township or we see in a community. So the tools are there. It's a matter of us floating those tools out there and getting input to see, is that something that we're interested in for Tate Township? Does it make sense? So similar to the breakdown of these categories, each one of those use types would have specific use standards tied to them. So that's kind of how this chapter is broken up. I did want to point out, so there would be a section of this called special use regulations, and that's where we would kind of integrate the solar regulations that were adopted as part of by the township. So it would be all incorporated within the use chapter itself, since it has to do with the use of property. And again, each one of these uses would have a definition to it. So animal hospital, kennel, daycare, or training facility, there would be a definition for that, because we would see that as being different in different operations than an animal veterinary office or clinic. As far as overnight stays, the activities that happen. So this is just an example. We would look at these being in, there would be a definition for each one of these uses for clarity's sake. Going back to the zoning districts themselves, so that kind of outlines chapter 3. Why don't we pause there? I know it's a lot of information, so yeah.
I think we probably absorbed.
So
Fights are getting bigger.
what are the reactions at this point?
I like the graphics, I like the quick chart reference, look
Yeah.
up, that is
Yep.
huge
Yeah.
based on what we currently have.
Yes.
I thought thumbs up.
I wanted to try to stay out of the content, and it just happened that I went into it, so sorry about that. But the main,
Well, I think you have to.
Yeah.
explain it, like-
yeah, the main point of this is really the organization and structure of how we would propose the code B or the resolution B. So then when there are drafts available or as content happens, kind of know how to look through it.
Absolutely.
It's easier to find.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Just have to know what all the letters stand for.
That's
it.
Put them on the front page.
So moving in the right direction as far as this goes. I know
Absolutely.
a lot of this is informed by the comprehensive plan, but we're doing it at the same time. So trying to be pretty nimble on how we craft this for your review.
For sure. And I
Um,
think there are basic uses, right, that we know will exist regardless of,
yes.
I mean, we know these will happen, the question sort of becomes, okay, is it a permitted use?
Right.
Is it conditional or permitted with standards, and what are those standards, right? But like, we know there are gonna be those sorts of uses, and we know generally, at least what the base districts are, and I really like the way you've broken down, based on the feedback we've gotten, sort of the concept of different sections within the agricultural district. I think it's a really interesting concept to sit down and think about, okay, well, let's divide a little bit between just straight agricultural and agricultural, or rural residential, and then even more of like a commercial residential, or commercial rural, so that we can identify places where maybe people don't want a huge amount of commercial, but maybe it would be nice to have the ability to have a couple of businesses that serve, you know, the southern part of the township or the northern part of the township, or whatever it might be. So I think that's really interesting to sort of think about and mull over how we can do that work.
Other initial thoughts for this?
I want to thank you. The one slide you had up there showing that the our existing page, and then you showed that it's in there and the new.
Yeah.
That shows that nothing's being changed. It's just being organized.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that
and-
is nice.
That's the plus right there.
Oh, yeah.
What it's saying.
Just organization is.
I know.
100% right.
It's a
So-
huge improvement.
So this
If you
is,
don't do anything else, it's.
Yeah, if we do anything else, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, right.
what I will say is that these uses are not the exact same as what you have in there,
Right,
but
yes.
the starting point for this and
Right.
for
Yeah. It
this
back here where you
was,
yeah.
I went through each one of those districts and did a use table based off of what is currently permitted within each one of those districts and how those uses are defined in each one of those chapters. So this is where I was kind of talking. You got a use called cemeteries, and then you've got another one right there. They're permitted with standards within the R1 and R2 districts. This one is conditional use within an agricultural district. So are those different because they're permitted in different districts different ways, or is that the same thing? So
Getting that.
eliminating
that
those
symmetry.
inconsistencies,
Yeah,
I think, is
streamline.
key in doing this. So I wanted to show this to show how your current code can be modernized into this format that gives you a quick snapshot instead of having to reference all of it. So this is really, we're not just starting from scratch. We're really looking at your existing code and seeing how the lessons that you guys have in place right now translate to what we're seeing in the comprehensive plan, translate